At 6:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a security alert, and when I glanced at the live feed, I watched the president of our homeowners association swinging a crowbar into my visitor's truck like she was trying to cave in a safe. Glass burst across my driveway in bright glittering shards. Then she leaned in and carved 2 words into the door with slow, angry precision. "Get out." I didn't even put on shoes. I ran straight outside in a t-shirt and sweatpants, heart slamming the cold pavement biting my feet, and I still couldn't believe what I was seeing in real life. Her name was Victoria Preston, 50s, perfect hair, designer perfume that hit you before her voice did, and that voice, the kind that sounded polite even when it was threatening. She'd been running our HOA like her personal kingdom for years, and I didn't understand that until it was too late. When I first moved into Brookstone Estates, I thought the rules were annoying but harmless. You know the type: mailbox colors, trash cans out of sight, lawn height measured like it's a science project. I was coming out of a rough divorce, and honestly, I wanted quiet more than I wanted control. The first week, Victoria greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a welcome packet thicker than my lease agreement. "We keep standards here," she said, tapping the paper like it was scripture. "It protects property values." 2 weeks later, I got my first violation notice for my trash can being visible from the street by maybe 3 inches. 3 inches. She'd stapled a blurry photo to the notice like it was evidence in court. I paid it, not because I agreed, I just didn't want to be on her radar. That was my mistake, because once Victoria decided you were the kind of person who would swallow it, she never stopped feeding you. The fines started stacking up in a way that didn't even feel random. Improper window coverings, unapproved garden edging, vehicle overnight limit exceeded. Meanwhile, the people who laughed with Victoria at meetings could park an RV for a week, and nobody said a word. Then my girlfriend Dana Hart came over one weekend. She drove a government-issued pickup. Nothing flashy, just practical with those plain plates that don't look like normal plates. She stayed the night, left early the next morning, and that was it. Except Victoria showed up at my door that afternoon holding a clipboard like a weapon. "Your guest vehicle violates community standards," she said. "Guests are limited. This isn't a hotel." It was one night I told her, and she's my girlfriend. Victoria gave me a slow blink and smiled like she'd found a loose thread on my sweater. "Then I suggest you educate her on how we do things here." After that, every time Dana visited, there was a notice. Every time, like clockwork. And it didn't take long before I realized it wasn't about the truck. It was about reminding me who had power. I started documenting everything because that's what you do when someone weaponizes paperwork. Photos, dates, timestamps, copies of every notice. I bought a cheap folder, then another, then a plastic bin. I sent a formal request to the HOA for records, fine histories, vendor contracts, meeting minutes. The kind of thing you're allowed to ask for as a member, even if certain people hate the idea. Victoria's response was immediate and petty. She emailed me, "Your harassment of volunteer leadership will not be tolerated." Harassment, because I asked for paperwork. Then a contractor showed up at my house claiming my walkway was a safety hazard and I needed to pay for an emergency inspection. He couldn't explain the report he was supposedly following. Couldn't tell me where the complaint came from. And when I asked for his license number, he suddenly got very interested in leaving. I called the number on his truck later. It rang to a personal voicemail. That's when I stopped thinking Victoria was just a bully with a clipboard. This was a system, a little machine designed to squeeze people quietly until they either paid up or moved out. It got worse the weekend before a community meeting I organized. I used the most boring title I could think of, Budget Transparency Town Hall, because I wanted it to be legit and hard to block. I wasn't trying to start a riot. I just wanted answers. Victoria tried to cancel it. She told residents it was unauthorized. She tried calling an emergency board meeting to stop it. But the bylaws were clear: members can call meetings about governance issues. That's when Victoria panicked. On Saturday, she pushed through a sudden emergency vote to fire our management company and restructure financial oversight. Translation: control the flow of information before anyone else saw it. People started whispering that she'd been in the HOA office late, shredding things. The funniest part is, she thought she could erase history like it was a whiteboard. But our secretary, sweet old school, the kind of woman who still used carbon copy paper, had backups. Boxes of them. And that's how Victoria's cleanup turned into evidence. On Sunday, she called 911 and reported that I was coordinating with criminals to intimidate the board. I'm not kidding. A police officer walked into my living room, took one look at my neatly labeled binders, and then looked at Victoria like she was having a public breakdown. "Ma'am," he said, calm as anything, "documenting HOA issues isn't a crime." Victoria's face twitched like the word ma'am offended her. By Monday, she tried a financial Hail Mary, an emergency special assessment for $3,000 per household for infrastructure improvements nobody asked for and nobody voted on. It was so obviously desperate it almost made me laugh. Almost. And then Tuesday morning happened. That alert hit my phone metallic movement detection, and I looked at the screen expecting to see a raccoon or a delivery guy. Instead, there was Victoria in my driveway, crowbar in hand, walking around Dana's truck like she owned it. Crash driver's side window, screech metal groaning as she carved into the paint, clang side mirror ripped loose hanging by wires like a broken limb. She didn't look scared. She looked satisfied, like she'd finally gotten permission from the universe to stop pretending. I ran outside and shouted her name, and she didn't even flinch at first. Then she turned, saw me, and gave me that same controlled smile. "This vehicle doesn't belong here," she said. "It's intimidating the community." Intimidating. I stared at the broken glass glittering across my driveway. "You're literally vandalizing someone's truck." Victoria lifted her shoulders like she was explaining math to a child. "I'm enforcing standards." That's when I felt something heavy settle in my stomach. Not fear exactly, more like exhaustion. The kind you feel when you realize you've been in a fight for months and the other person doesn't even see it as a fight. They see it as entertainment. For a split second, I thought about selling. I thought about packing everything up, walking away, letting her win, because at least then I could sleep again. I stood there staring at the damage, and I wondered how many people before me had made that exact choice quietly, privately, with a knot in their chest. Then Dana pulled up behind me. She stepped out, saw her truck, and didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just took a slow breath like a professional who's seen this movie before. Victoria's smile faltered when Dana walked closer and calmly asked, "Did you do this?" Victoria lifted her chin. "I did what I had to do for the neighborhood." Dana nodded once like she'd just checked a box on a form. Then she looked at me and said softly, "Don't say anything about who I am yet." That's when I realized this wasn't just personal anymore. This was criminal. Over the next few days, we did everything the boring correct way. Police report, insurance claim, photos, video export from my security system. 4K footage, her face clear, her crowbar, swinging the carving, the readable plates, all of it. Meanwhile, the town hall meeting grew like a storm cloud. People who never spoke at meetings started showing up with folders like they'd been waiting years for permission to breathe. One neighbor had timelines. Another had emails. Someone had invoices showing vendor charges inflated by hundreds of %. We built a shared evidence folder so big it felt unreal. Hundreds of entries, years of patterns, selective enforcement, emergency fees, contractors who magically knew Victoria, racist comments caught on recordings, transfers to shell companies. It wasn't one bad decision. It was a whole operation. On the day of the meeting, the community center parking lot overflowed. Local news crews showed up expecting a boring budget story. A couple of investigators sat scattered in the room like normal residents, and I sat in the third row with a banker's box at my feet, hands steady, jaw tight. Victoria arrived right at noon in a navy suit, briefcase in hand, walking like she was about to deliver a speech that would put me back in my place. She grabbed the microphone without being invited. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "before we address today's unfortunate gathering, I need to warn you about a criminal conspiracy targeting your elected leadership." I stood up before she could build momentum. I walked to the front, set the box on the table beside her, and flipped it open. "Since we're talking about conspiracies," I said, "let's start with facts." I projected the original incorporation papers showing limits on fees. Gasps rolled through the room as people did the math in their heads. Then I showed bank records money moving out in neat little streams. Then vendor contracts. Then the audio file. Victoria's voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable, complaining about certain people ruining the neighborhood image. The silence after that was thick. and then I played the video. The room watched Victoria destroy the truck in stunning detail. Glass exploding metal, shrieking, her face calm, the crowbar rising and falling like she was chopping wood. Victoria's skin went pale in real time as she realized the cameras weren't just recording. They were convicting. She snatched at the microphone, voice cracking. "This is manipulated, this is—" That's when Dana finally stepped forward. Victoria stared at her confused for half a beat, then her expression shifted like a curtain dropping. Because at some point, somewhere in the last week, someone had told Victoria exactly who Dana was. Dana kept her voice low, almost casual. "Victoria Preston, she said you vandalized a government vehicle. On camera. During an active financial investigation." Victoria's mouth opened, and nothing came out. An investigator in the back stood up. Another one moved toward the aisle. The news cameras zoomed in like they could smell blood. Victoria tried to take one step back, then another, like distance could undo the last 8 years. It couldn't. The handcuffs clicked loud enough to echo in that room. Victoria's briefcase hit the floor, and as she was guided out past a crowd of residents she'd bullied into silence for years, she didn't look powerful anymore. She looked small, and finally, accountable. Lesson bullies thrive in quiet, so document everything and get loud before they get criminal.